Recently, there have been some reports that Christian icons have been doing miracles. Now, really, this isn't a new thing, but it's cropped up once again. What does the Bible say about this kind of stuff? Do we have an answer for it as Christians? Stay tuned, and we'll talk about it. Well, good evening and welcome back to another week of Explained, another week where we engage the culture from a biblical perspective in a manner which glorifies God. My name is Troy and I am your host. I'm so thankful that you've decided to join us for another week of Explain. And this week, boy, we're going to be talking about something that at least I find pretty interesting. People have been saying that there are these so-called Christian icons that are performing miracles. And as I mentioned in the opening, this is not really a new thing. You can find reports, as long as there have been icons, there have been people reporting that these icons have been performing miracles pretty much. And when I say icons, and I say Christian icons, notice I'm using these quotes because really these icons are found in the Catholic Church and in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and not within mainline Protestant churches. So let me just make that very clear out of the right out of the gate here. We're not really talking about so-called evangelical Protestant churches that are putting icons in their churches, and those things are, so to speak, performing miracles. No, what I am referring to is these Catholic Orthodox icons that are performing miracles according to them. So a couple of things, because this is something that we really haven't covered on this show before, and so I want to make sure that that we are all on the same page here before we start. What is an icon, specifically in this context? An icon is very simply, I want to define it very broadly and simply, a religious work of art. A religious work of art. And I would just say, just to add a little bit of a wrinkle into that, a lot of times these religious works of art are looked upon with great reverence, even elevated to deified status in some cases. We'll get into that as we go. And the claim is that these icons are performing miracles of some kind. And we'll get into a couple of the examples here, and we'll investigate. That's what we're doing today. You know, we're putting on our investigator glasses, we're putting on our investigator hat, and we're seeing if these claims really hold up. Okay, and if there's a biblical explanation for what we're seeing here. All right, so that's the claim, that people say that icons are doing miracles. And again, I just want to say this is not a new thing. This is not a new thing. People have been claiming this for a long time. I've just recently seen claims, so it just kind of brought it back into my mind. Another thing that comes up a lot is this idea of the iconoclast. The iconoclast. And I'll put that up on the screen so you can see how it's spelled, so you'll be able to recognize it if somebody writes it out or types it or something like that. What is an iconoclast? The word literally means image breaker, and the contemporary idea of it is anybody who does not offer full-throated, full-voiced support for the idea of venerating icons, worshiping icons, placing special value upon icons, including icons in liturgy and so on and so forth. Anybody who does not get along with that program, basically. Anyone who doesn't get in step with that program is oftentimes labeled an iconoclast. So we here at Your Kingdom Come would be labeled by the Roman Catholic Church and by the Eastern Orthodox Church as iconoclasts, because we do not believe that the veneration of icons, the worship of icons, the placing, special value in icons, we don't believe that any of that is necessary for a liturgy. We don't believe that any of that is necessary for a worship service. We don't believe that if you don't do that, you're not doing true worship. No, we don't believe any of those things. And we also don't believe that the icons themselves are doing miracles, okay? So we would be labeled iconoclasts. And I've even seen people say things like iconoclasts are not Christians, basically. And honestly, that's no surprise. I mean, you can take offense to that and just kind of be like, like shocked at first. But I mean, really, you think about it. I'm not making the claim that there are no false converts within the Protestant church. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is we shouldn't be shocked when other denominations and other faiths, to put it frankly, call us not Christian. All right, that should not be shocking to us. At any rate, this idea of icons doing miracles. Let's get into it. I want to look at a couple of things that I've noticed throughout the course of this week. One example. This is an old example. Okay, this is not something that's recent. It's this idea of this icon in Hawaii apparently that does all sorts of interesting things according to reports. This person here from orthodoxbridge.com says this icon is what I would call a quiet miracle. When I stand before it, I can see oily streaks on the glass cover and smell the flowery fragrance emanating from the icon. The first time I saw the icon, I was surprised by the absence of drama. Yet, as I stood before it, I found myself amazed at this inexplicable phenomenon. It was as if God opened this window to heaven just a tiny bit, allowing the fragrant scent of heaven to flow over into our fallen world that is so desperately in need of His mercy. There are stories of people being healed miraculously after being anointed by the oil coming from this icon, but then there are many who have not been healed after seeing this icon. These healing miracles are a gift from God, but they are not the main point. With respect to miracles, orthodoxy is not cessationist. Cessationism, look at this. This is funny. I got something to say about this. Cessationism is the heresy that miracles ceased with the death of the last of the original apostles. I have to stop there. Okay, and we could keep going reading that, but let me address the last thing first. Okay, this is a misrepresentation of cessationism, and I'm not even a cessationist. Okay, I would not say that I'm a cessationist, but even so, cessationism is not the heresy as it says. It's not heresy. Cessationism is not, as it says, the heresy that the miracles ceased after the apostles died. That's not what any cessationist believes, okay? The cessationists say that the sign gifts that accompany the apostles are no longer active, okay? So it doesn't mean that people don't get healed. That doesn't mean that miracles don't happen, okay? That just means that there aren't specific people with the gift of healing, okay? There aren't specific people with like the gift of healing where they could walk into a hospital and heal everybody in there. Okay. Otherwise, why aren't we seeing that happening? Right. That's what they believe. That's what a cessationist believes. And so anyway, all that to say, and I'm as far as cessationism is concerned, I don't really want to get into it. Get into that whole argument. That's not the point of this. But I think that this is a gross misrepresentation of cessationism, and I'm not even a cessationist. So anyway, let's get into this miracle that they say happened. Let me just say this. This is interesting, this first line that I read, that it was a quiet miracle. And I really think this is key because oftentimes people who look for miracles will think that they're seeing them. Okay, they'll think that what they're seeing in front of them is a miracle, and to erase that little bit of doubt they might be feeling in their head, they'll say it's a quiet miracle, right? They'll say it's not a flashy miracle or a big loud miracle. It's not a miracle like Jesus did, which is ironic because really these people are claiming to follow Jesus, right? But anyway, that was interesting. The next line says, "When I stand before it, I can see oily streaks on the glass cover and smell the flowery fragrance emanating from the icon." And then it actually repeats that line. The first line, basically. "The first time I saw the icon, I was surprised by the absence of drama. Yet as I stood before it, I found myself amazed at this inexplicable phenomenon." So the question is, like, all right, what are you seeing? And are you just imagining the flowery fragrance, or could it possibly be that maybe the room smells nice because it's a church? Like, I don't know. Like, these are all things you got to think about. Could it be that maybe the oily streaks on the icon could be anything? All right. See, this is the thing. A miracle is when there is no natural explanation. It's what this person described as an inexplicable phenomenon. That's a miracle. The problem is, this isn't actually an inexplicable phenomenon. I mean, you can come up with so many reasons why this is not, you can come up with so many reasons why this is not a miracle. Any skeptic could come along and say, this is not a miracle because of X, Y, and Z. You didn't account for, the temperature in the room. You didn't account for the fragrance in the room. All of these things these are questions that have to be answered. And then this idea of people being healed and some people getting healed and not other people getting healed. I mean, again, this is something that we see in the charismatic church. And we're quick to say that there are all sorts of different fakes and all sorts of different situations where people claim to be healed and they're not. And then there's also the go figure, the fact that God still does desire at some points to heal people, whether they deserve it or not, whether they're Christians or not, whether they prayed for it or not. Okay, so we obviously can't rule that out. We do believe in a living God who has mercy on people, even in those ways, even if they don't deserve it at some points. Okay, and so I don't think that there is some kind of miracle that's special to this icon that's happening, as if the icon is performing a miracle, or as if God is performing a miracle through the icon. I really don't think that that's what's going on here. Okay, I also want to address this. This is from Shayne Swenson Icons. I guess this is a guy who goes around as I guess he works on icons. And he says this: just as the divine liturgy cannot be properly celebrated without prayer. He's basically saying that you can't worship properly without prayer. He says, it is also impossible without iconography. And he quoted Saint Dimitru Stanilone. Hopefully I got that right. And then he says he's talking about these icons that he's working on. But I want to address that quote, okay? So he's saying that you cannot properly worship God without icons. Now, let me ask you this. Where is that in the Bible? Where is it? Chapter and verse. I mean, or even just give me something that even hints at that. Give me something that explains why here's the problem, okay? Let me just put it to you straight. The Bible says that you should not make any image of a god. You should not make any images, any false images, or worship them, right? Do we remember that from the Ten Commandments? So when you are worshiping an image of a saint, when you are worshiping an image of Mary, you are worshiping a false god, okay? You are not worshiping the one true God, and you cannot get around that. Okay, so far from the thought that icons are required in worship, I would say that icons are a stumbling block in worship, oftentimes. All right, now let's move on. This is from Father Christopher. Okay, let's look at another icon miracle. He says, wow, a new miracle that just happened in Romania. Right after the proclamation of 16 new saints by the Romanian Orthodox Church, the icon of Saint Arsenie Boca, revered for his spiritual guidance and miracles during his life, began to shine with an intense divine light for a few seconds. Oh, boy. a few seconds. Let me just think about this. Think about the story of Moses. He comes out of the presence of God, right? Comes out of the presence of God, and it says that his face is shining, right? And he had to cover his face. Does that sound like it lasted for a few seconds? Does that sound like you had to be looking for that miracle in order to see it? That's not what it sounds like to me. How about when Jesus was transfigured? Do you think there was any doubt that there was a miracle happening in front of those disciples? I don't think so. Do you think it lasted for a few seconds? No, I don't think so. All right, let's move on. This miraculous event took place right outside the church, witnessed by many. It's like St. Arseny himself was giving a heavenly nod to his canonization. This is not just a sign, it's a spectacle of faith and divine approval. The energy and awe from this moment are truly indescribable. Okay. Again, you have to be looking for this so-called miracle in order to see it. And again, this is not an inexplicable phenomenon. Okay, we don't know. Could the sun have come through the clouds for a few seconds? Could someone have shined a flashlight on it? I mean, could someone have held a candle up to it? Could someone have taken a picture? I mean, with a flash camera. I mean, there are so many different things that are, again, not explained here. The context is important. In the miracles that Jesus performed, in the miracles that the disciples performed, there was no denying what happened. That's why the chief priests and the Pharisees and the Sadducees were trying to kill these people, because they had no other explanation for it. Lazarus raised from the dead, so they tried to kill him, because what are they going to do? They don't have any other explanation for it. That's a miracle. That's a miracle. An icon shining for a few seconds is not a miracle. That's not a miracle. All right. Now, what I'm about to say next might be surprising to you, and you might think this goes against everything that I just said, but it doesn't. Okay. Let me take you to a story in the book of Exodus. Okay. Just because, before I get into this, just because there are not miracles being done by God in a situation, okay? Just because God is not doing miracles does not mean that supernatural stuff is not happening. Now, to be clear, I don't actually think that that's what's happening in those examples that we just saw. All right. But there are situations where stuff happens that seems inexplicable, right? We cannot come up with an explanation as Christians for what we're seeing. And we know it's not from God. We know because it's in a false religion, for example, or something like that, right? There are situations like that. And so what do we do in a situation like that? Well, we need to have an awareness that there is a supernatural world out there. Okay, the world that we're living in is not just these physical molecules that are around us, right? There is a spiritual world. There's a spiritual war going on. And for an example of this, I'd like to point you to Exodus chapter 7. I'm going to read verses 8 through 13. This story might be familiar to you. God has just told Moses and Aaron that if they throw down Aaron's staff, it will become a serpent. And if he picks it back up again, it will turn back into a staff. But at any rate, this story kind of demonstrates for us how we should react. And it also shows us that supernatural stuff can happen. The question is not whether or not it's supernatural. The question is who's motivating it and what's behind it. All right. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Prove yourselves by working a miracle,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent.' So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent." So far, so good, right? And then the story takes an interesting turn. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and they, the magicians of Egypt, also did the same by their secret arts. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Okay, so, there are a couple of things that could possibly be going on here. As far as Aaron's staff, we understand the explanation for that. It says that these men, these sorcerers, magicians, by their secret arts, caused their staffs to become serpents. We can't go around that. We can't say, no, that didn't happen. We have to acknowledge that there is a supernatural thing going on here, right? But the question is, who is behind that? Well, we're told it's the secret arts. It's demonic stuff. That's what's behind that. And yeah, God is sovereign over it, but he's allowing it to happen. And the reason why, in this case, God's allowing it to happen, I would say, is so Aaron's staff can swallow up theirs. But we can't get into this frame of mind where we see a supernatural thing happen and say, it's not supernatural. It can't be supernatural if there is no other explanation for it. We just need to understand that not every supernatural thing is necessarily a divine, great, good miracle from God, okay? There are demonic forces out there, and they also, we're going to see in this next passage, they also are sometimes inhabiting these idols, okay? So to take what I said earlier a little bit further down the road, there are some situations where people are venerating icons and they may actually be worshiping demons. Okay? Now, and that's not even too strong of a statement. Because if people are worshiping something that is not God, if they're worshiping a graven image or a statue of something that's not God, then we're told that demons oftentimes will be behind that, receiving that worship. So be careful. You're venerating an icon, you might be worshiping a demon. Okay? Let's look at this. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 16 and 17. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations, they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. Okay? So this is the idea of them worshiping false gods. And we know some of the false gods they worshiped. For example, do you remember the golden calf? And what happened when they made the golden calf was Aaron says, what does he say? Here's the God that took you out of Egypt, right? Here's your Redeemer. And it's horrible. It's blasphemous. It's idolatrous to do that. And we're told that in cases like that, oftentimes when people are worshiping something like that, the demon will be receiving worship. Okay, and that's what we're told here. In the one verse, it says they were worshiping strange gods. Okay, but that doesn't mean that there's not something supernatural going on. Just because it's a false god doesn't mean that there's not a supernatural transaction happening. But the supernatural transaction is not worship to a god; it's worship to a demon, and we see that the very next sentence. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods. Okay, so the first sentence, they stirred him to jealousy with strange gods, and then it's substituted out for demons that were no gods, two gods they had never known. Okay, and so we see here that it is perfectly possible and even in some cases likely that when people are worshiping icons, they're not worshiping who they think they are. Okay, they're worshiping someone in some cases who, if they were still alive on earth, they would be heartbroken and probably angered that you are worshiping them. Like, for example, if someone worships an icon of Paul, could you imagine what would happen if Paul came back and saw that happening? All right. Could you imagine we would have Galatians volume 2, where he says this is a false gospel, and anyone who does this is going to be anathema, probably, right? Like, we would have something like that if Paul was able to see what people are doing in that situation. Okay, he would be horrified. And so, to round it all up, are icons performing miracles? I would say the examples that we saw, the icons are not performing miracles. In fact, I would say that no icon has ever performed a miracle. No icon has ever performed a supernatural action. There is a supernatural world behind this stuff that, which we can't see. But if you're seeing a miracle, you could say, or a supernatural event take place, specifically in around one of these icons, I think oftentimes there are other explanations for what's going on. And even if you came across a situation where there wasn't another explanation, we need to remember that we don't live in a world that's just physical, right? We are unaware oftentimes of the fact that there is a supernatural battle taking place. And so it is perfectly reasonable to say that maybe there is a demon inhabiting certain icons receiving worship. It could also be perfectly likely that God decided to be merciful to someone in a specific case. I'm thinking specifically about those healing situations, right? Where inexplicably, not because of anything they had done, not because of anything that not because of any god that they worshipped, clearly, because they're worshiping false gods, worshiping icons, venerating icons and stuff. But there are situations, I think, where God decides to just be merciful to people. And I think that's definitely on the table. I mean, he heals people that are not Christians sometimes. Okay? And so, no, I don't think that icons are performing miracles. But I do think it's important to remember that we live in a world where we can't see the fact that there is a supernatural battle going on. And Satan and his demons are constantly trying to win. They never will, but they're constantly trying to. Okay, and so we need to remember that there is a supernatural battle taking place. That's why we're told to put on the armor of God. Our struggle is with principalities, right? It's not with flesh and blood. All right? Well, I hope you guys have a great week. We'll see you next time. God bless.